Whispers of the Ridge, a tale of superstition and secrets. In the heart of Appalachia, where ancient forests whisper secrets and the hills hold mysteries, a childhood adventure and a decades-old tragedy reveal the power of superstition and the weight of hidden truths. The Witch of Rattlesnake Ridge. I grew up in the small town of Crestwood, North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee border, where the Appalachian Trail stretches into the Great Smoky Mountains and the Pisgah National Forest. Nestled in a triangle of dense woods, Crestwood was a place steeped in the spirit of Appalachia, a spirit that seeped into its people for better or worse. The folks here were some of the most superstitious I'd ever met. Every culture has its quirks, knocking on wood to ward off bad luck, or fearing a black cat crossing your path, but Appalachians took it to another level. My grandmother, for instance, had a deep mistrust of anyone with a dimpled chin, claiming, "Dimples are the devil's footprint." She wasn't joking. She also believed that eggs laid in odd numbers foretold misfortune, that washing clothes on Sundays invited disaster, and that wearing a buckeye in her pocket could fend off ailments. She was a firm believer in bad luck, black magic, and the otherworldly, a trait common in Lower Appalachia, where the line between reality and folklore often blurred. So when my friend Caleb told me about a witch living near Rattlesnake Ridge, I didn't dismiss it outright. Caleb, swearing on his cousin's account, claimed this witch lived in a one-room shack on the ridge's south side, where she'd cursed 4 men to mysterious deaths just after the war. His cousin even knew the exact spot. At 12 years old, I was skeptical but curious, and I challenged Caleb to prove it. To my surprise, he agreed. We set out one Saturday afternoon, 2 kids hiking through the woods, a journey not as reckless as it sounds. Growing up in rural North Carolina, we knew how to navigate the forest, treading heavily to scare off snakes like rattlers, which would slither away or warn us with their rattle if we got too close. After an hour, the tree-covered ridge loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. Caleb's cousin had said we'd smell the witch's fireplace smoke before we saw her shack, where she supposedly cooked the bones of children into charms. I expected to wander aimlessly and prove Caleb's cousin a liar, but then we caught a whiff of campfire smoke. Caleb's eyes lit up. I told you he wasn't lying. And I felt a shiver, the kind you get from a ghost story told around a campfire. It was too perfectly timed, like a horror movie twist. But I rationalized it. Smoke meant a campfire, not a witch. Determined to prove my point and show my bravery, I pressed on, Caleb trailing nervously behind, warning me about the witch's deadly curses. About 200 yards in, we spotted a thicket of wax myrtle trees, their dense, wavy leaves forcing us to duck low as we wove through, dodging occasional dogwoods. Beyond them stood an old log cabin, its stone chimney puffing smoke. It looked the part shabby, with a broomstick by the door, dried herbs, wind chimes, and strange charms hanging around the entrance. Caleb whispered, "You believe me now?" I was starting to, but I needed more proof, no black cats or flying brooms yet. Just as fear began to grip us, the door creaked open, and out stepped an old woman. Her white, patchy hair, stooped posture, and wart-covered face fit the witch stereotype perfectly. I froze, regretting my skepticism, while Caleb blurted, "There she is!" The woman heard, spinning toward us with a squint, her voice raspy as she shouted, "Who's there? Y'all better show yourselves!" We bolted, terror driving us through the woods, convinced we'd be cursed like the 4 men. We split up, agreeing to tell our parents and maybe get the police to convince the witch to lift her curse. At home, I broke down to my parents, confessing everything. They reassured me there was no witch, just an old woman who'd lived there for years, wanting solitude. She couldn't curse us, but we shouldn't have trespassed. My mom called Caleb's parents, who echoed the same, and soon Caleb and I were laughing over the phone, relieved to have sprinted from a woman who couldn't have chased us far. Back at school, we shared the truth with classmates, debunking the witch rumors despite their insistence on her deadly curses. The 4 men's deaths, we learned from our parents, weren't her doing. She was just a reclusive woman, not a supernatural threat. A dark truth uncovered fast, forward to 2004. Caleb and I, now adults, were back in Crestwood visiting family. With no bars in town, we drove 10 miles south to Pineville to drink, catching a Panthers game and playing pool at a quiet bar. As the night wound down, we reminisced about the witch of Rattlesnake Ridge, laughing at our childhood fears, but wondering why she lived alone and what really happened to those 4 men. Our conversation caught the ear of an older man at the bar, a former Crestwood resident. He bought us beers and offered to share an eerie tale about the woman we encountered. Initially, I teased him, joking about broomsticks and frog transformations, but he wasn't amused. He insisted the men's deaths were tied to her not through magic, but through a grim reality. If anyone involved were still alive, he wouldn't speak, but since they were gone, he'd tell us the truth. One of the men was her husband. I sat down, sobered by his revelation. Her name was Clara Hensley. In 1941, she married Thomas Hensley, and their early years were happy until Pearl Harbor changed everything. Thomas was drafted, sent to fight in North Africa, and later declared missing in action. In 1942, Clara learned he was among American soldiers massacred by Germans, their bodies burned. Devastated, she mourned deeply, but by late 1943, she began a discreet relationship with a local store clerk unfit for service. The town didn't judge her for seeking happiness, and by 1944, their affair was an open secret, with many hoping for a proposal. But in early 1946, a telegram arrived. Thomas was alive, liberated from a German camp, emaciated but recovering. He returned a town hero, but Clara didn't want to end her affair. One night, after drinking with old friends, Thomas came home to find Clara with the clerk. Enraged, he beat the clerk, tied him up, and assaulted Clara, forcing his friends to join in. They then dragged the clerk into the woods, killed him, and hid the body. Clara, battered and barefoot, reported it to the sheriff, but Thomas denied the murder, claiming the clerk fled in shame. With no body or witnesses, the sheriff had no case, though the town believed Clara. Months later, Thomas's house burned down arson, with him inside while his 2 friends died in suspicious accidents. One crashed into a tree, the other poisoned by tainted whiskey. State Patrol investigated, but with no witnesses. The deaths were deemed coincidental, though the fire was confirmed as murder. Clara, hearing of their deaths, began to recover, taking long walks to Rattlesnake Ridge, searching for the clerk's body. Eventually, she stopped returning, and word spread of her cabin either newly built or refurbished, where she lived out her days. The witch rumors likely started as a way to keep curious kids away, but her story was one of tragedy, not magic, a dark chapter in Crestwood's history. Shadows of the Trail, unsettling encounters in Appalachia. The Appalachian Trail and its surrounding wilderness are places of stunning beauty, but also of chilling mysteries. From a reclusive woman's tragic past to eerie discoveries on the trail, these stories reveal the darker side of nature and humanity, the legacy of Clara Hensley. Clara Hensley, once known as the Witch of Rattlesnake Ridge, chose to live in isolation near the last known location of her lover's body, hoping to find closure while escaping a world that had failed her. Her story, shared by an old-timer in a Pineville bar in 2004, unraveled a tale of heartbreak and vengeance. After her husband Thomas's presumed death in World War II, Clara had sought solace in a new relationship, only for Thomas to return alive, leading to a violent confrontation that ended with her lover's murder and her own assault. The mysterious deaths of Thomas and his accomplices, arson, a car crash, and poisoning were never fully explained, but they allowed Clara to reclaim her life. She spent her remaining years searching for her lover's remains near Rattlesnake Ridge, living in a cabin that became the source of local legends. Her story, though tragic, found peace in its telling, offering answers to a decades-old mystery. A night of terror on the Appalachian Trail. Years ago, my friend Ethan and I were hiking a rugged section of the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee. Weighed down by camping gear, but determined to push through. After days of grueling hikes and sleepless nights in thin tents unprepared for the humid Tennessee summer, we were exhausted. On the fourth day, we met a solo hiker who mentioned a 2-story shelter about 10 miles ahead, with raised sleeping platforms. It wasn't a cottage, but it promised a full night's rest, so we hurried to reach it by nightfall. The shelter was a simple wooden structure with 2 platforms, one higher than the other, but it was a welcome sight. We claimed the lower platform, cooked dinner, and settled in. Soon, 2 more hikers, a couple, Jake and Emily, arrived, asking to use the other platform. We agreed, hoping for a peaceful night. But the couple began arguing almost immediately, their whispered disputes creating an awkward tension. They'd stop, then start again, with phrases like, "You never listen," and "It's too far, Emily, we won't make it," floating down to us. Ethan muttered, "Just break up already." And I stifled a laugh, but Emily overheard and confronted us. Jake pulled her back, and we denied laughing at them, not wanting to escalate the situation. Their arguing continued into the night, waking us around 2 a.m. with louder voices. Emily shouted, "Maybe that's exactly what I'll do," and we heard her pack hit the ground as she climbed down the ladder. Jake pleaded, "Don't do this, Emily." But she stormed off into the dark trail with only a flashlight, determined to hike alone. Ethan called after her, warning against a solo night hike, but she yelled back angrily and kept going. Jake refused to follow, too angry, but we urged him to go after her, warning he'd regret it. Tensions rose as Ethan challenged Jake, nearly sparking a fight, but I intervened, pulling on my boots to go after Emily myself. Before I could, a scream pierced the night, followed by another, freezing us in terror. We grabbed our flashlights and raced down the trail, Jake sprinting ahead with desperate speed. We found Emily just off the path, her leg bent at a horrific angle, clearly broken. She screamed, "He's here! He's still here!" claiming someone had attacked her. As we tried to help, she explained a man had hit her leg with a blunt object and fled. Panicked, we carried her back to the shelter, scanning the woods for her attacker. We armed ourselves with knives and hatchets, tending to her injury with basic first aid. With no cell service, we took turns keeping watch, fearing the assailant might return, possibly armed. At dawn, we made a makeshift stretcher and carried Emily to the nearest town, Hampton, for medical attention. We stayed to support Jake through police reports, but the investigation led nowhere. No suspect was found. Emily's leg healed, but the incident left us shaken. We skipped ahead 10 miles to finish our hike, keeping our knives close every night after that. The Appalachian Trail is mostly safe, but that night taught us to never underestimate its dangers. Graves in the wilderness. During a college summer, my friend Mia and I were hiking the Vermont section of the Appalachian Trail, enjoying the challenge until an unsettling discovery cut our trip short. On day 3, while praying for dry weather, Mia spotted a bright red cloth hanging from a tree branch 20 yards off the trail. Thinking it was litter, we approached to remove it, but as we got closer, we realized it was a marker. Beneath it, in the dirt, were 2 shallow, empty graves. Terrified, especially since there were 2 graves, and 2 of us, we didn't touch the cloth and hurried to the nearest town, Bennington, to report it to the police. We couldn't call 911 from the trail due to poor signal, and our priority was distance from the site. The police took our report seriously, giving us a contact number for updates, but we were torn about continuing. Mia wanted to skip ahead and keep going, but I couldn't shake the fear that more graves might be out there, possibly part of a trap. We stayed in a motel overnight, calling the sheriff the next day. He hadn't yet investigated, but promised to check that day. Frustrated by the delay, I couldn't continue, and we ended our trip early. Mia was disappointed, but I couldn't risk our safety. Those graves were too deliberate to be a prank, and the uncertainty haunted me. A chilling find. Near Intown, Pennsylvania. While hiking near Intown, Pennsylvania, on the Appalachian Trail, my friends and I stumbled upon something eerie. During a break on some rocks, one friend noticed a metal tin at the base of a boulder. It looked like an old candy tin, the kind with a hinged lid. We joked about finding someone's stash, but inside were two dirty pieces of paper. The first, unfolded by my friend, showed a crude drawing of rocks and trees, seemingly the spot we were at. On the back, it read, "This was the last thing Emily ever saw." We froze, stunned. The second note, unfolded by another friend, was titled, "List of people I want to apologize to," followed by names of people the writer had stolen from. The handwriting was shaky, possibly written at different times, but we couldn't confirm if it was the same person. Theories swirled. Was this a suicide note, or something darker? The mention of theft suggested a third party, but the absence of an apology to family made it ambiguous. We searched the area for signs of a body or foul play, but found nothing. The forest floor too disturbed to identify a grave. Unable to ignore it, we took the tin and notes to the nearest town, handing them to the police. We explained everything, emphasizing we couldn't walk away from such a find, even if it might be a cruel joke. The police took it seriously, but we never learned the outcome. To this day, it remains the creepiest thing I've encountered on the trail. Echoes of the past. A tale of legacy and the occult. In the quiet village of Barton, a family's dark history and a mysterious inheritance reveal the unsettling legacy of a reclusive uncle whose life and death were steeped in the strange and forbidden. The shadow of Uncle Elias. Uncle Elias had always been the outcast of our family, a constant source of tension for my father and a reminder of our lineage's troubled roots. Elias Thornton was my mother's older brother, a man whose very existence seemed to defy normalcy, a figure whispered about in Barton as a deviant, possibly even a practitioner of unspeakable acts. His appearance alone could unsettle anyone. A broad, flat head, thick lips, and enormous glassy eyes that seemed to belong to some deep-sea creature rather than a man. Every Saturday he'd shuffle through Barton's cobblestone streets to the local shops, his awkward gait causing villagers to cross the street to avoid him. I too was unnerved by him, especially because I bore a faint resemblance to him, though thankfully, my features were far less pronounced. My mother also carried what locals called the Thornton look, but hers was subtle, marked only by her large, pale eyes, a faint echo of our tainted bloodline. Elias lived in solitude, in a decaying cottage at the edge of Raven's Hollow, a desolate wooded area near the village cemetery. The hollow was a place of eerie tales. Strange lights and voices were often reported around Halloween and May Eve, nights when frogs croaked ominously and owls hooted warnings. Pets, and occasionally children, would go missing, only to be found dead the next morning. My mother warned me as a child to never venture into Raven's Hollow, despite Elias living there, hinting at dark secrets hidden among the twisted trees. Every Barton child grew up with similar warnings, and for good reason. Years before I was born, a girl named Lily Carter was found dead in the hollow, half sunk in a muddy stream. Officially, she drowned, but the villagers whispered of darker causes, pointing fingers at Elias. Despite its grim reputation, Raven's Hollow became a daring playground for boys during summer breaks. Elias, dubbed Mad Thornton, was a target of their cruelty, a local bogeyman. They'd throw rocks at his windows or knock on his door before running away, laughing as the strange man peered out before retreating inside. As his nephew, I wasn't spared. The other children's taunts extended to me, and I became a loner, desperate to avoid their scorn. One Halloween, the harassment peaked when a boy named Tommy Reed, the boldest among us, planned to egg Elias's cottage. He entered the hollow alone, armed with a carton of spoiled eggs, while the other kids waited at the edge of the woods. Hours later, Tommy returned a hollow shell of himself, mute, his eyes vacant. He never spoke again, and after years in a care facility, he took his own life on the 13th anniversary of that night. Elias was questioned, but denied seeing Tommy, and no evidence linked him to the boy's trauma. After that, the other children shunned me entirely, deepening my isolation. A family tainted by history, Elias rarely appeared at family gatherings, showing up briefly only to vanish again. My father loathed him, not just for his appearance, but for the strange objects and ancient books he collected. Elias was an odd scholar, obsessed with esoteric knowledge. His cottage was a chaotic archive of crumbling grimoires, written in languages like Latin, Greek, and others so strange they seemed otherworldly. His rooms were cluttered with warped skulls, taxidermied birds, and intricately carved crystals, a testament to his fascination with the forbidden. My father's hatred extended to the Thornton family history. Our ancestors had come to England from Innsmouth, Massachusetts, a town steeped in dark legends of witchcraft and monstrous deeds. They'd fled to Cumbria under suspicion, branded as sorcerers by those who drove them out. My grandparents, who I never met, refused to speak of Innsmouth. My parents had settled in Barton after meeting in Seascale, where my father, an architecture enthusiast, had been exploring the Victorian Scawfell Hotel. He met my mother on the beach collecting shells, and they fell in love. They married in Barton, but Elias came with them, as my aging grandparents could no longer care for him. He lived with my parents briefly before moving to the cottage in Ravens Hollow. My grandparents soon died of a wasting illness, and at their funeral in Seascale, Elias inherited their collection of strange books and artifacts, which had been hidden in their attic. An unexpected inheritance. I had little contact with Elias, his presence always unsettling me, so I was shocked when Mr. Harrow, our family solicitor, informed me that Elias had named me his sole heir. Elias had died on July 24, 1954, walking naked into the Irish Sea at Seascale, leaving only footprints and clothes behind. With no body recovered, he was declared dead years later, and I inherited everything: his cottage, his collection, and a small sum of money. Seascale held significance for our family. Many Thorntons had been seafarers, and legends spoke of pirate ancestors. The choice of location for his death seemed deliberate, tied to our maritime past. Mr. Harrow advised against entering the cottage, calling it a rotting hazard, and suggested hiring locals to retrieve Elias's belongings. I had no desire to step foot in Ravens Hollow and agreed, also asking him to sell my grandparents' Seascale home, which he quickly did to a distant Thornton cousin. My father dismissed the inheritance, assuming I'd want nothing to do with Elias's things, but my mother was visibly anxious, probing my intentions. I assured her I only wanted to catalogue and sell the items, which eased her slightly, though her unease lingered. Uncovering the collection finding workers to clear the cottage was difficult. Barton locals were too superstitious to enter Ravens Hollow. I eventually hired a few Polish laborers, unfamiliar with the Thornton reputation, to move everything to my cellar. The collection filled the space, turning it into a maze of yellowed papers, sagging shelves, and glass-eyed taxidermy, illuminated dimly by a single bulb that cast eerie shadows. I avoided the cellar for weeks, distracted by work, but after missing a promotion, I took leave to sort through the items, hoping to profit from them. The task was daunting. Separating Elias's notes from the books took ages. The volumes were ancient, some centuries old, with titles like Culte des Ghouls by Comte d'Erlette, De Vermis Mysteries by Ludwig Prinn, and Unaussprechlichen Kulten by Friedrich von Junst. An English book, Things of the Water, originally Ktat Aquadingen, contained Elias's notes, underlining rituals and names like Dagon, Hydra, and Cthulhu. I skimmed it, but found it chaotic, dismissing the collection as fictional occult nonsense. I listed the titles, authors, and odd names, sending the details to rare book dealers in London. A buyer emerges. Dr. Cornelius Vane, a collector, responded eagerly, offering a six-figure sum for the entire collection, a fortune that left me reeling. He wanted any notes by previous owners, but I withheld Elias's diaries for sentimental reasons, claiming the books came as is, though I mentioned some underlined passages. Dr. Vane accepted and arranged to collect the books in person. My father was thrilled at the news, seeing it as a victory over Elias, while my mother's joy seemed forced, her discomfort clear. I assured her I'd kept the diaries, but she remained indifferent, and my father suggested burning them. A disturbing visitor. When Dr. Vane arrived, I was taken aback by his appearance. Tall and emaciated, he towered over me despite his hunched posture, his pale skin and jet-black hair contrasting his advanced age. Dressed in outdated, ill-fitting clothes, he looked like a scarecrow, his cold hand and long nails sending a chill through me as we shook hands. His hollow voice and predatory demeanor unnerved me as he inspected the books, greedily flipping through them with talon-like fingers. He wrote me a check, which I quickly secured, and accepted tea, continuing to examine his purchase with unsettling delight. We spoke for hours, and I shared Elias's story, the Thornton history and the strange events in Ravens Hollow. Dr. Vane listened intently, especially when I mentioned other relics in my cellar. He asked to see them, suggesting he could connect me with buyers. I led him downstairs, where he rifled through the items, dismissing most until he uncovered a tall object beneath a sheet. With a dramatic tug, he revealed a 7-foot-tall, 3-foot-wide mirror framed in white gold, carved with fish, octopuses, and amphibians. At its ends were figures resembling a mermaid and merman, but their faces were a grotesque blend of human, fish, and frog, a sight that left us both speechless in awe and horror. Secrets in the Glass, a tale of horror and heritage. A chilling encounter with an ancient mirror and a scholar, revelations uncover a dark family legacy tied to the ocean. Depths, leaving a lasting mark on an unsuspecting heir. The mirror's unholy dance. The carvings on the mirror's frame seemed alive, fish and amphibious creatures twisting as if caught in an unseen current, making my head swim if I stared too long. The glass itself was an eerie green-blue, distorting our reflections like a murky pond rather than a true mirror, its surface rippling in the dim cellar light. Dr. Vane stepped forward, tracing the golden frame with his skeletal fingers. To my shock, he gripped the tail of a carved merman, bending and snapping it off with unnatural ease. The metal morphed in his hands like clay, defying its rigid nature. He rolled it into a ball, pocketed it, and with a strained expression, covered the mirror with the sheet again. His pale face etched with worry, he urged us to leave the cellar immediately. Back in the lounge, he requested fresh tea and asked me to sit, his voice trembling as he began to speak. A tale of cosmic horror. Dr. Vane's story was a descent into madness, spoken as if my uncle Elias's books held undeniable truths. He described a history spanning millions of years, where extraterrestrial beings, entities that seeped from the stars, once ruled Earth, long before humanity's earliest ancestors. These godlike creatures, he claimed, had experimented with life, inadvertently creating the precursors to humans. He named them the Elder Things, the Old Ones, the fungi of Yuggoth, and the great race of Yith, all ancient visitors to our planet. Some remnants, he said, still lurked in the ocean's darkest depths, plotting in sunken cities like Yihanthle, where light never reached. He quoted things of the water, invoking names like Cthulhu, Dagon, and Hydra, the latter two depicted in the mirror's carvings as the grotesque fish-frog figures. Dr. Vane spoke of a race intertwined with humanity, the Deep Ones, who lived immortal in the abyss, tied to families like the Thorntons through ancient pacts. The mirror, he revealed, was a gift from the Deep Ones to their human worshippers, a portal to contact the ocean dwellers during dire times or unholy rituals. By the time he finished, it was too late for him to catch the last train to London. Reluctantly, I offered him my guest room. He retired, but I couldn't sleep, haunted by the idea of the Thornton taint and Elias's obsession with those books. Had he sought a cure for his condition, or something darker? His final act walking into the Irish Sea now seemed like a deliberate return to the depths he'd studied. A night of terror. I dozed off on the couch, a brandy glass in hand, only to be jolted awake by a loud crash. Fearing Dr. Vane had fallen, I rushed to the guest room, but it was empty, the bed untouched. Searching upstairs yielded nothing, so I headed to the kitchen, noticing a faint light under the cellar door, not the bulb's glow, but a sickly green-gold hue. I opened the door quietly, wincing at its creak, determined to catch Dr. Vane in whatever he was doing. Descending the rickety stairs, I saw the mirror lying flat on the floor, emitting the eerie glow, which faded as I approached. Turning on the bulb, I froze. Dr. Vane's lifeless body lay against the wall, his face twisted in terror, hands clawing at his throat. A briny stench filled the air, and wet, inhuman footprints trailed from the mirror to his corpse. The prints were thick, gluey, reeking of the sea, and as I glanced at the mirror, its surface seemed to ripple, as if something had just retreated from view. Overwhelmed, I fainted, the room fading into a merciful haze. The aftermath and investigation. When I came to, I called the police, fearing suspicion of foul play. But after learning Dr. Vane was to pay me a fortune for the books, a sum I'd lose due to a later estate dispute, they ruled his death a heart attack, claiming he'd been exploring the cellar. I lied about the light being on and hid the mirror's involvement, returning it to its upright position and covering it, also taking the gold piece from Dr. Vane's pocket to avoid scrutiny. I kept silent about the glow and footprints, knowing I'd be dismissed as mad. The loss of the fortune was devastating, a cruel twist tied to Elias's possessions. But the mirror haunted me most. Its horrors replaying in my dreams, sometimes with Dr. Vane gasping warnings, other times being dragged into the glass, or a flabby claw retreating into its depths. Descent into madness. The nightmares grew unbearable, forcing me to consult a doctor who prescribed sleeping pills, which only intensified the visions. I turned to coffee and cigarettes, sitting in my garden to avoid sleep, but the stars above took on a sinister meaning after Dr. Vane's tales, their twinkling filling me with dread. My condition cost me my job, isolating me further, until a visit from my mother broke the cycle. I confessed everything Dr. Vane had told me, expecting shock, but her face remained stoic. She admitted such stories had long circulated about the Thorntons and Innsmouth, though she knew little of our roots, having been distant from family. Elias had been closer to their parents, caring for them in their final years. She mentioned a Thornton cousin, Ezra, who'd bought my grandparents' Seascale home, suggesting I contact him to offload Elias's items and ease my mind. Seeking answers in Seascale. Through Mr. Harrow, I got Ezra Thornton's name and address. Unwilling to travel without assurance, I sent a letter detailing my identity, Elias's books, the mirror, and the incident with Dr. Vane, asking for any family history that might explain it. Ezra replied, inviting me to visit. I boarded a train from Eastwich to Seascale the next day, carrying things of the water and Elias's notes in a briefcase. The journey, with changes at Manchester Piccadilly and Barrow-in-Furness, offered a brief respite as I gazed at the wild green hills of northwest England, hoping for answers to calm the storm within. The mirror's revelation, a descent into legacy. A journey to Seascale and a ritual in Raveness Hollow unveil the horrifying truth of a family's connection to the ocean's depths, sealing a fate tied to an ancient, otherworldly heritage. Arrival in Seascale. The train rolled into Seascale, the vibrant countryside giving way to the grey, weathered buildings of the seaside town. Ezra Thornton had instructed me to meet him at my grandparents' old home on Reed's Avenue, warning me he avoided daylight, likely due to the same wasting illness that had claimed their parents. I'd hoped to explore the town, but the dreary autumn weather, light rain and heavy clouds dampened my plans. After a brief walk and a quick meal at a seaside cafe, I headed straight to Reed's Avenue. The street was a cramped row of Edwardian buildings, mostly bed and breakfasts, overlooking the crumbling coastline. I paused to gaze at the sea, imagining Uncle Elias's final moments, his pale, heavy frame wading into the icy waves until they claimed him. The wind carried a foul stench of rotting seaweed and brine, stirring memories of my nightmares and urging me to move on. The house on Reed's Avenue. The house stood between two guest houses. A tall, three-story structure painted a faded white, its iron fence rusted. Every window was boarded up or hidden behind thick curtains, signaling Ezra's need for privacy. Stone steps led to a red door, the only splash of color, though peeling paint revealed a cracked brown beneath. As I approached, I noticed a note under a sour milk bottle, written in a familiar, shaky script. It instructed me to enter the door was unlocked. Inside, the house was dark and narrow, the staircase leaning oddly at the top, as if the building sagged against its neighbor. The light switch didn't work, so I stepped into a barren living room to my right. It was empty, with sheets nailed over the windows, blocking out the faint daylight. This wasn't a home, it was a tomb. Meeting Ezra Thornton. A series of loud thumps from above startled me, my imagination conjuring ghostly tales. I froze, but the sounds repeated, drawing me to the staircase. The thin carpet barely hid the dry rot beneath, but I gathered my courage, reminding myself I was here to see family, not a specter. The stairs creaked little as I climbed, reaching a landing with several doors. One was ajar, and from within came a wheezing breath and a wet cough. I knocked and entered, finding a sparse room with covered windows and 2 dusty crimson chairs. In one sat a figure draped in rags and a scarf, a flat cap on his misshapen head. He gestured to the other chair, and I sat, setting down my briefcase. His face was hidden, but his bulging bloodshot eyes protruded unnaturally, a grotesque version of the Thornton look I knew too well. His voice was liquid, punctuated by coughs, and I noticed odd movements beneath his scarf, like gills opening and closing. He asked, "Do you have the book?" I handed him Things of the Water and Elias's notes. He scribbled in the diary, referencing the book, occasionally glancing at me with those unblinking eyes. A disturbing exchange. More thumps echoed from above, and Ezra grabbed a broom, striking the ceiling in a deliberate pattern, a coded response, confirmed when the knocks replied. He explained, "Forgive my sister. She's bedridden, succumbing to our family's condition." His breath reeked of fish oil, making me recoil. Noticing my discomfort, he leaned back and said, "Sit, cousin. We have much to discuss, and my time is short. You've heard some from that doctor, but only a Thornton can truly guide a Thornton." He revealed why our family fled Innsmouth. Our great-grandfather, a sorcerer, had invoked sea gods like Dagon and Cthulhu, without the order of Dagon's approval, seeking power for himself. Fearing his abilities, the order exiled him and his Deep One wife, sparing his life perhaps out of fear of divine retribution. The mirror, he said, was his creation, a tool to commune with the sea gods and watch his transformed kin in the ocean depths. In Seascale, he continued his rituals, mixing Thornton blood with the Deep Ones, a legacy many locals unknowingly carried. A horrific legacy unveiled. Ezra's voice grew weaker as he spoke of his and his sister's impending transformation, a fate shared by Elias, who had walked into the sea to join the Deep Ones. He revealed a shocking truth. He and his sister were Elias's children, born of a Deep One mate, and my mother had also borne me with such a union, my father merely a human facade. "You'll change too," he rasped. "The blood of Dagon runs strong in our men. Use the words I wrote in that book, at the times and places it says, and you'll find your answers." He fell silent, exhausted. I sat, reeling, as the weight of my heritage sank in. I needed air. Grabbing my belongings, I backed toward the door. As I descended, Ezra's voice barked, "Thornton blood runs deep, cousin, prepare for the change." His mocking, guttural laugh followed, chilling me as I fled into the gray afternoon. The ritual in Raven's Hollow. Back in Barton, I studied Ezra's notes, a ritual to uncover the truth about the Thornton look. I had no desire to visit Raven's Hollow on Halloween, but I couldn't wait for the next date, Walpurgis night. I prepared as instructed, moving Dagon's mirror from my cellar to Elias's crumbling cottage, placing it flat in the main room. The full moon's light was crucial, so I brought a flashlight, navigating the woods without hiding from the nocturnal creatures. My mind conjured visions of the Hollow's victims, Lily Carter, Tommy Reed dancing among the trees. The cottage emerged, a rotting husk surrounded by witchy elms and black earth, covered in orange fungus and moss, insects swarming its decay. Inside, the mirror lay ready. A trapdoor in the roof, serving as a skylight, opened easily, letting moonlight flood in. The vision in the glass. The moonlight didn't reflect, but was absorbed by the mirror, illuminating the cottage in a ghostly glow. I dropped my flashlight, crawling closer, mesmerized. The carved figures of Dagon and Hydra glared at me, and then the vision began a grotesque underwater scene in a Cyclopean grotto. Fish-like creatures danced and writhed to an alien rhythm, worshipping eroded statues of Dagon, Hydra, and a towering living Cthulhu, its tentacles swaying as it oversaw the frenzy. The beings tore at each other in a chaotic ritual, and I feared being pulled into the abyss of Yahanthle. But the true horror came when I recognized a face among them, Uncle Elias, not dead but transformed, now a deep one, having joined them in the sea. I realized this was my fate too, and the shock sent me into unconsciousness. A final confession. I write this as a warning. By the time it's found, I'll be gone, transformed, and dwelling in the briny depths with the deep ones, as all Thornton men must. The mirror showed me my family's true legacy, a bloodline cursed to join the ocean as horrors, a truth that broke Tommy Reed and drove Elias to his destiny. I can feel the change beginning, and soon I'll follow.